Growing up, I was always overshadowed by my older sister. They called her the golden child of the family, the one who could do no wrong. From the day I was born, I was simply a background character in her spotlight. My parents never made it subtle. They showered her with praise and love, while I was often left in the shadows. There were days when I wished I could disappear into thin air, just to avoid the constant comparisons. It started innocently enough. Birthday parties were always about her, with her favorite flavor of cake, her preferred gifts, and her perfect smile. I remember one birthday when I tried to make a wish for myself, but my mother quickly reminded me how my sister was the real joy of the family, and how it was her presence that made everything bright. I didn't even get the chance to finish my thought. The moment passed, and with it, my fleeting hope that one day I would feel seen. School was no different. Every report card I brought home was met with cold indifference. But whenever my sister's grades arrived, the house was filled with celebrations. When I would get a B, they'd ask what went wrong and why I couldn't be more like her. But when my sister received her report cards filled with A's, they would hang them up proudly, showcasing her brilliance for all to see. My sister was everything they wanted in a child. Beautiful, smart, and effortlessly popular. Meanwhile, I was awkward, plain, and often had trouble making friends. I was invisible, and I began to believe it was my fault. But it wasn't just the compliments and accolades she received that hurt. It was the way my parents dismissed me when I tried to share my accomplishments. They only seemed interested in her. One year, I got an award at school for a project I had worked on for months. It was a big deal to me. But when I came home to share the news, my parents barely acknowledged it. That's nice, dear, my mom said, distractedly, while my sister, who had done absolutely nothing to deserve attention that day, was praised for making her bed without being asked. It was as though I didn't exist unless I was a walking example of what not to do. My sister was the perfect daughter. The more I tried to prove myself, the further I felt from them. My birthday cakes always had to be her favorite flavor, chocolate. Even though I hated it, I wanted vanilla. I wanted something that was mine. But I never got it. My sister's clothes, her shoes, her friends, they were all better than mine. I became a ghost in my own family. But it wasn't just the superficial things. It was the deeper, more profound hurt that festered inside me. When my sister made a mistake, the blame would be placed on me. She would break a vase, and I would get yelled at. She would forget to do her chores, and I would be punished. My parents were convinced that whatever happened was my fault. There was no way around it. I was the scapegoat. And it wasn't just the little things that cut me. It was the bigger issues. When I had an argument with a friend or made a mistake, I would be grounded, and my parents would accuse me of lying if my sister did the same. It was just a misunderstanding. The unfairness weighed heavily on my young shoulders. I began to wonder if there was something inherently wrong with me. I watched my sister thrive in everything she did. She was adored by everyone. But no matter how hard I tried, I was always second best, or worse, completely invisible. If I tried to stand up for myself, I was shut down, made to feel guilty for having any kind of self-worth. The resentment I felt toward my sister slowly turned into something darker. She was the golden child, and I was the afterthought. She always got what she wanted, while I had to beg for scraps of attention. I used to think that maybe, just maybe, if I could prove myself, if I could be as perfect as she was, maybe they would finally see me. But as the years went by, I realized that wasn't going to happen. The more my sister thrived, The more I crumbled, and the more my parents praised her, the more isolated I became. I started to withdraw from everyone, retreating into myself, trying to understand why I was never good enough. But I didn't have the answers. I was just the invisible one, and the anger I felt, it simmered beneath the surface, waiting for a chance to explode. It came one day when I was in high school, and my sister made her biggest move yet. The years went by, and I grew up. But the pain of my childhood never really went away. I found my own ways to cope, including distancing myself from my family as much as I could. But the more I distanced myself, the worse it seemed to get. My sister, now a young adult, had become even more spoiled and entitled. And just when I thought things might improve, I was about to face the biggest betrayal of my life. It was the week before my wedding, and I was feeling a mixture of excitement and dread. I had found someone who loved me, someone who saw me for who I truly was, and we were planning to start our life together. But the closer I got to the altar, the more I felt the presence of my family looming over me. They were determined to make the day all about my sister. It started innocently enough. My mother and father insisted that my sister should walk down the aisle first, claiming it was only fair since she was the older sibling. They made it clear that she needed to experience this moment too, even if it wasn't her day. And just like that, my dream wedding had turned into another chapter in the story of my sister's golden child narrative. I was furious. I had worked my entire life to get to this point, and now they were trying to steal it from me. I should have spoken up, should have made my voice heard. But as usual, I found myself silenced by their demands. They didn't even try to hide their intentions. They wanted my sister to have the spotlight. And nothing, not even my wedding day, would be able to change that. But what they didn't know was that I had learned something over the years. I had learned how to play the game. They might have controlled my childhood, but they wouldn't control me anymore. I had a plan, and this time, the spotlight wouldn't be on my sister. It would be mine, and I would make sure of it. I began to formulate a scheme with my husband, a plan that would allow me to have the day I had dreamed of, without interference. But it wasn't just about the wedding. It was about finally standing up for myself, about taking back control of my life. For once, it wasn't about pleasing anyone else. It was about me. I didn't know exactly how things would play out, but I knew this. My sister would not walk down that aisle before me. The plan was simple, yet it required precision and patience. I couldn't afford to let my parents or my sister suspect anything. If they found out, it would be ruined. But I was done being the obedient daughter, the one who always complied with their unreasonable demands. This time, I was in control, and my wedding day would be mine to cherish. First, I knew that I needed to maintain appearances. I had to continue being the obedient daughter on the surface, while quietly setting the stage for the confrontation that was to come. So I smiled through my parents' constant remarks, their seemingly innocent comments about how my sister should be the one to walk down the aisle first. But inside, my heart was seething with frustration. The moment my parents suggested that my sister walk down the aisle before me, I knew I couldn't let it slide. I had to get back at them, not just for the wedding day, but for all the years of hurt and humiliation. My husband was completely on board with my plan. He knew how much this meant to me, and he was determined to see it through. He also had a plan of his own, one that involved getting the necessary evidence of my family's betrayal. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, my husband made several trips to my parents' house. And each time, he made sure to engage in casual conversations with my sister. He wanted her to feel comfortable, so she wouldn't suspect anything. He played the part of the supportive fiancé, pretending to be oblivious to the tension in the air. But underneath, we were both working to manipulate the situation in our favor. We took advantage of the fact that my parents were so desperate to please my sister. Whenever they would mention paying for aspects of the wedding, we'd play along, making it seem like we were thrilled with their involvement. But what they didn't know was that we were subtly steering them into making the arrangements we wanted, from the flowers to the venue options. We pretended to be indecisive, letting my sister think she was calling the shots. In reality, we were pulling the strings from behind the scenes. Everything was set for the big day. We had prepared the venue, arranged for security, and even hired an undercover team to ensure that my sister wouldn't be allowed in. The only thing left to do was to watch it unfold and hope that my sister's ego wouldn't get the best of her. But then, just days before the wedding, my sister made her move. She started acting strange, more desperate than usual. She began to demand more attention, more focus on her in every conversation, even insisting that she be involved in all the wedding planning decisions. I could feel the tension rising. It was as if she knew something was about to happen, though she had no idea just how far we had gone to make sure the day would be mine. It was clear she wasn't happy about being sidelined, but she was determined to make herself the center of attention. As always, I could see her trying to subtly undermine me, even down to the smallest detail, like making sure everyone knew about her helpful contributions to the wedding plans. She was working her charm on my parents, making sure they believed her story, that she was just looking out for me, trying to make sure everything went smoothly. But deep down, I knew it was all an act. She wasn't worried about me. She was worried about losing the spotlight. As the wedding day approached, my heart pounded with anticipation. I had worked so hard for this moment, and nothing was going to ruin it. But there was a part of me, a small voice in the back of my head, that told me things could still go wrong. I had to keep my emotions in check and stay focused on the end goal. The day before the wedding, everything seemed to be falling into place. My parents were too busy to notice that I was slipping away from their grip, but I could see them growing more anxious. My mother asked if I was okay, if I was sure I didn't need anything. I just smiled and told her I was fine. Little did she know I had everything under control. Then came the morning of the wedding, and I could feel the tension in the air. My sister arrived, looking radiant in a beautiful dress, one that she had handpicked herself. Of course, she walked around with an air of entitlement, acting like she was the bride, not me. It was almost as if she thought the day was still about her. I took a deep breath, ready to execute the final part of the plan. The moment had arrived, and the wedding was about to begin. Everything was in motion, and I felt a rush of adrenaline as I got ready. My husband stayed close by, reminding me to stay calm and focused. We had come so far, and now all that was left was to watch the chaos unfold. My parents were seated at the front, their faces a mixture of excitement and pride. My sister stood off to the side, looking impatient and frustrated. She had been making comments all morning about how she didn't understand why she couldn't walk down the aisle first. Every remark, every sly smile she threw my way made me want to explode. But I kept my composure. The ceremony was about to begin, and I was ready. I had worked so hard to make sure that everything would be perfect. But it wasn't just about the wedding. It was about taking control of my life and finally standing up for myself. As the music began and my bridesmaids took their places, I stepped into the aisle, ready to walk down toward my future. But just as I was about to reach my father, something unexpected happened. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from my husband. She's here. They're about to try to pull it off. My heart skipped a beat. I knew what this meant. The plan was in motion. My sister was outside, ready to walk down the aisle before me. I could feel my father's eyes on me, and I knew he was expecting me to react. But I didn't. I didn't say a word. Instead, I turned to my bridesmaid, who had been in on the plan from the start. She gave me a nod, and we both knew what to do next. The doors opened. Yari, pambush, and I stepped into the aisle. But just as I did, my father looked behind me, expecting to see my sister. When he realized she wasn't there, confusion filled his face. He glanced around, unsure of what to do. That's when the real chaos began. The tension in the air was palpable as I walked down the aisle, every step feeling like the weight of a lifetime. My heart pounded in my chest, not from nerves, but from the sheer anticipation of what was about to unfold. As I approached the altar, I could see the shocked expression on my father's face. He had no idea what had just happened or what was going on. He was still looking around, trying to figure out why my sister wasn't walking down the aisle before me, as he had so eagerly planned. The room was silent, filled with whispers and gasps from the guests who were unsure of what was happening. My bridesmaids and the rest of the wedding party stood still, perfectly in place. As they knew their roles, the music played on, its notes filling the room with a surreal sense of calm amidst the chaos. But inside, I was anything but calm. I was relishing every moment of this. This was the moment I had dreamed of for years. My father's confusion grew as he continued to look behind me, expecting to see my sister, who was, at that moment, being blocked by security at the venue entrance. He still hadn't realized the full extent of the plan yet, but I could see the panic beginning to creep into his expression. He reached for his phone, no doubt to call my sister and ask where she was. But before he could even dial the number, the door at the back of the hall opened, and there she was, my sister, in her wedding dress, storming into the venue. The room went silent. She looked furious, her face red with frustration, as she pushed her way toward the front, expecting to be allowed in. But what she didn't know was that security was already on high alert, and they were under strict instructions to not let her pass. The security guard, a tall, imposing figure, stepped in front of her. "I'm sorry, but you can't go through," he said in a deep, calm voice, his hand blocking her way. "Excuse me," my sister snapped, her voice dripping with disbelief. "I'm the one who's supposed to be walking down the aisle first. I'm the older sister." The security guard shook his head. "No, ma'am, there's already a bride. You'll have to leave." My sister's face contorted with anger, her eyes darting from the guard to the guests, who were now all watching, unsure of what was happening. Her voice rose in outrage, but no one came to her aid. The guests were either too stunned or too polite to intervene. It was a spectacle that no one had expected, but one that had been carefully orchestrated from the start. Meanwhile, my father stood up, visibly flustered. He quickly approached the security guard, his voice shaky. "Do you know who I am? She's my daughter. Let her through." But the guard didn't flinch. "I'm sorry, sir, but we've been instructed not to allow her entry. You'll have to speak to the wedding coordinator." The confusion was now spreading throughout the room. My father, growing more frustrated by the second, fumbled with his phone, trying to call my sister, but it was already too late. She had been stopped, and there was no going back. My mother, who had been silent until this moment, now rushed forward to see what was happening, her face a mask of disbelief. As my sister continued to argue with the security, I saw my moment. My husband, who had been standing off to the side, watching the chaos unfold, caught my eye. He gave me a nod, a silent promise that everything was going according to plan. I could see him smirking, the joy of seeing my parents squirm in the background, making him look like the cat that had just caught the canary. The whispers from the guests grew louder, and my father, realizing that his plan had fallen apart, started to panic. "What's going on? Why is this happening?" he asked, his voice rising in volume. At this point, I knew it was time. I reached my husband at the altar, and we shared a brief but meaningful glance. He squeezed my hand, and I took a deep breath, ready for what was to come. My mother, looking desperately for an explanation, turned to me. "Why didn't you stop this?" she demanded. But I wasn't going to back down. I had fought for this moment, and I was determined to enjoy it. I turned to my parents, my voice calm but firm. "This is my day. This is my wedding, and it's about me and my husband, not about who gets the spotlight. For once, it's my turn to be the one who's noticed." My mother's face fell. She had no words. My father, still standing at the entrance, had stopped trying to intervene. The realization of what was happening seemed to sink in, and I could see the regret in his eyes. But it was too late. The damage had been done. At that moment, my sister finally gave up trying to argue and turned to leave. She looked crushed, defeated. My mother, now pale, turned to me, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean for this to happen. We just thought it was right." I shook my head. "You always thought it was right. You always thought she deserved everything. But now, for once, it's my time." The tension in the room finally started to subside. The guests, who had been watching in disbelief, began to murmur amongst themselves, their whispers now filled with sympathy for me. My sister had failed to get the attention she craved, and my parents were left speechless. With the chaos behind us, I turned back to my husband. The day was still young, and there was nothing left to do except enjoy the wedding that had been fought for, not just for the celebration of our love, but for the justice I had been seeking for all these years. The rest of the ceremony proceeded without further incidents, and as I looked around the room, I realized that in the end, I had won. As the night progressed, my parents did everything they could to salvage their image, but there was no hiding the truth. My sister's tantrum, my father's failed plan, and my mother's silence spoke volumes. This was no longer about them. It was about me. The rest of the evening was a blur of laughter, celebration, and a sense of vindication I had never felt before. It was as though a weight had been lifted from my shoulders for the first time. I wasn't the invisible one. I was the one who had the last word, and it felt damn good. As we left for our honeymoon, my husband and I shared a quiet moment of victory. It wasn't just about the wedding. It was about taking back control, about standing up for myself, and finally making my parents realize the consequences of their actions. My sister never spoke to me again after that day, and my parents' attempts to apologize were feeble at best. But that didn't matter anymore. I had taken what was rightfully mine, and I knew that, for once, I had the last laugh